Everyone growing up in this country is trained and constantly reminded to put himself first, to be good to himself, to seek self-satisfaction, to go after the easy life, to look for pleasure, to pamper himself, to please himself. But Jesus said just the opposite. He said in Matthew 16, anyone desiring to follow him must deny himself. This is the condition to follow him. This is a requirement of heaven. It is not a suggestion. It is a must. His statement indicates that self can hinder us from following him, hinder us from going to heaven. So a very big decision is involved in the lives of the people. Either we deny ourselves to follow him and please him, or we deny him to follow self-satisfaction and please ourselves. It all depends where the person wants to go for all eternity. Because the decision that you make decides where you are going to spend eternity. In our text this morning, we are allowed to peek into heaven. And we will see two different altars there. An altar for incense and an altar for sacrifice. We will finally understand why Jesus made his statement about denying ourselves. Because sacrifice or self-denial is required to enter heaven. It is a requirement of heaven. So please turn with me to our text, Revelation chapter 8, verse 1, as we continue where we stopped last week. Chapter 8 has 8 parts. We see one seal in the first, which is the 7, and the last seal in the first 5 verses. Then we have 4 trumpets in a row every 2 verses. In Revelation chapter 7, the chronological order momentarily stopped. There was sort of a break to introduce 2 groups. The 144,000 male virgin Jews, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, and the soul who came out of the great tribulation. We saw them briefly at the opening of the 5th seal in chapter 6, verse 9. Now, as we continue with chapter 8, the chronological order resumes for a short while. The opening of the 7 seals that we started in chapter 6 will end here. The 7th and last seal is finally removed from the scroll, the title deed of the earth. There will be a similar break after the 6th trumpet. And again, it will be for an introduction of 2 things. They will introduce a little book in chapter 10, and they will introduce 2 witnesses in chapter 11. And then the chronological order will resume again. You've got to know those things in order to follow the book of Revelation, which is not too easy to understand. So John continues the story, and he says here in verse 1, when he opened the 7th seal, that is Jesus, the he. He's the one, the only one who qualified, remember, to remove those seals from that scroll. When he opened the 7th one, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. So at the opening of the 7th seal, 2 things happened. Number one, there was a long period of silence, verse 1, and there was the distribution of trumpets to 7 different angels in verse 2. No specific judgment is mentioned here. The first thing that happens is a total silence for about 30 minutes. Silence can be an awesome thing in a crowd of people. Imagine 30 minutes. I lasted 8 seconds. It's a pretty long time for silence, especially considering there are millions and millions of people there and millions of angels. You're talking about a crowd incredible. And for 30 minutes, not a beep. Even the heavenly hosts stopped their worship for 30 minutes. We saw them. They were worshiping God night and day. They stopped for that period of silence. Not a word is said, not a noise is made. What is this silence for? What does it signify? The Bible does not tell us. There is no explanation for it. Whatever people come up with is strictly speculation. It is amazing what people come up with when God is silent. And it is a dangerous thing to touch an issue that God is silent about. Whenever the Bible is not specific about an issue, we should not touch it. We should not try to explain it or make up some doctrines. If God is silent about it, we also need to be silent about it. There is enough already in the Bible without adding to it. We do not know what this silence is for, other than it appears to be the calm before the storm of judgment that is coming. Some people say that it is a proof that they have no women in heaven. They cannot be silent that long. I do not agree with that. I have met men who have out-talked women 10 to 1. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. They love to hear themselves talk, I believe, some of them. So we are not told what the silence signifies or why it happened at this particular time at the opening of the 7th and last seal. I guess if it was that important for us to know, God would tell us. The fact that these are angels' trumpets. There were 7 angels. There was a distribution. They were given a trumpet each. So they are angels' trumpet. Distinguishes them from the trumpet of God that we see in 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4. According to Numbers chapter 10, trumpets had a threefold use: to move the camp, to announce the war, and to announce the feast. So they used the trumpet when it was time to go, time to fight, time to celebrate. These 7 angels here are different from the 7 angels who have the 7 last plagues. We will see them in chapter 15. They are not the same. The most dangerous thing with the book of Revelation is to do association. You see something there, and you see the same thing, similar thing somewhere else, and you assume they are related, they're the same. They are not. 7 angels there are not the same. They are called presence angels. There are such things. They have a very specific duty and place. They stand right before God. And there seemed to be distinction among the angels, the angelic beings. There are different orders, different ranks, but they are all servants of God according to the book of Hebrews chapter 1 verse 14. They do not have a relationship with God based on redemption like we have. Angels have not been redeemed by God. God did not die for any angels. Their relationship is strictly based on their creation, not their redemption. They were created by God. We were redeemed by God. John goes on, he says in verse 3, then another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and he threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake. So here we have another angel, not one of the 7 mentioned previously, a different angel with a golden censer. And he stood right there by the altar. Must be careful here because there are 2 altars in heaven. Remember when God commanded Moses to build the tabernacle in the wilderness, that huge tent? He told him to be careful to do everything exactly as specified, because it was to be done accurately. God gave certain men gifts of the Spirit in craftsmanship to do exactly what God specified to do. The book of Hebrews tells us that the tabernacle was actually a model of heaven, a miniature design of heaven. Then the tabernacle had 2 altars, a bronze altar for burnt offering. It was in the outer court. It had a 7-foot high curtain around it, and they burned sacrifices on that altar. It was 7.5 foot by 7.5 foot, and it was overlaid with brass. On this altar, a fire consumed the body of the animals that were being offered as sacrifices. That was the burnt offering. That was the bronze altar. But they also had a smaller one, a golden altar for incense. It was in front of the veil separating the sanctuary from the Holy of Holies. No blood sacrifice were offered on that altar. It was only for incense. After the veil ripped when Jesus died, the altar ended up directly in front of the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat representing the presence of God. It was a smaller altar, was only 1.5 foot by 1.5 foot, overlaid with solid gold, with 4 horns at the corner. In front of it was the golden lamp with 7 lamps, the lampstand that they had. So 2 different altars, a large brass altar for sacrifices in the outer court, and a small golden altar for incense in front of the Holy of Holies. Now, some people think it is really boring to study the tabernacle in the Old Testament, and many Christians they just skip right over. It is not boring at all. It is exciting when we compare it to what John saw in heaven. The tabernacle in the wilderness was a small replica of heaven. Here the angel came with a golden censer, and he stood at the larger altar, the brass altar. He had no incense. The souls of those slain during the Great Tribulation that we saw in chapter 6, verse 9, are under that altar. Then the angel was given a lot of incense to go to the smaller altar, the golden altar, which is in front of the throne of God. This is the second time that we are told that the prayers of the saints are like sweet-smelling incense to God. He loves our prayer. They are sweet to Him, even though He knows exactly what we are going to say, what we are going to ask. Still, He loves to hear from us. He loves to hear our prayer. Now, the Roman Catholic Church uses verse 4 here to confirm one of their doctrine, the doctrine of intercession of the saints. Because the verse says that the prayers of the saints ascended to God, we must therefore pray to the saints, and they will intercede and will pray to God for us. So if you ask them why they pray to saints, they will go back here to Revelation to verse 4. The Greek word for saints means simply set apart, sanctified. All born-again Christians who set themselves apart for God are saints. All those who have set their lives aside for God's use are saints. It is our prayers from heaven that ascend to God, and not the prayer of those saints in heaven canonized by a pope. All 7 seals have now been removed from the scroll. So the angel filled a censer with fire from the altar, and he threw it on the earth. Verse 5. In the Old Testament tabernacle, a censer was made of copper, was heavier, and it was used to carry the coals from the brazen altar outside the tabernacle to the altar of incense inside the tabernacle. Later, when Solomon built the temple, Solomon used censers that were made of gold in 1 Kings 7 and 2 Chronicles 4. But this is the only reference to censers in the book of Revelation. So as the angels threw the censer, 4 things happened on earth. Noises are heard, thundering are heard, lightnings are seen, and a great earthquake is felt. Some people say that God is angry at what is going on earth, so He shakes it. Not really. This is not what is happening. God's judgment is in response to the prayer of the saints who have asked to be avenged. Remember, we saw that chapter 6 earlier. Those people who died in the Great Tribulation, because it will be possible to be saved in the Great Tribulation. Those who were saved in the Great Tribulation had to suffer. They were beheaded, they were killed, they were murdered, they were martyred, and they are there at that altar, and they are asking God, when are you going to avenge us? So that's what is happening here. That's why God is not angry at what's happening, but He is replying to the prayer of the saints. At verse 6, we have the second part. Now we have the first trumpet. John continues. He says, so the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. And 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. So after the earthquake, the 7 angels get ready. They are prepared to take their turn and to sound the trumpet, each one by one. Verse 6. At the sound of the first trumpet, something unusual happened. Hail, fire, and blood. Not earth, wind, and fire. Hail, fire, and blood. They come down from heaven. We have never seen anything like this before. We have never heard about such a thing. Talking about the Great Tribulation, Jesus said that there would be things like we've never seen before. But something close to that has happened before. You remember when or where? In Egypt, during the days of Moses. There's 7 plagues in Exodus chapter 9. Hail mingled with fire came down, but there was no blood in it like here. From that hail, 1/3 of the trees on earth are burned up. Also, all the green grass is burned up. This is no excuse to stop watering your lawn. We do not know exactly what it is. It could refer to some extreme volcanic activity as the result of that earthquake. Later on, when the 7th angel will pour the 7 bowl in Revelation chapter 16, a different kind of hail will fall on earth. Totally different. A hail of stones, not little gravel, stones of about 75 to 90 pounds each will level everything on the earth. The target is vegetation, but it will affect food supplies, lumber production, everything on earth. Men should look at creation and thank God. Instead, men worship the creation, Mother Earth, and could care less about God. God will judge the God that man has created. Mother God is gonna get it, Mother Earth. At verse 8, we have the 3rd part, the 2nd trumpet. John continues, then the 2nd angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. And 1/3 of the sea became blood. And 1/3 of the living creatures in the sea died. And 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. So the first trumpet affects the vegetation. The 2nd trumpet affects the ocean. Something like a great mountain burning with fire falls from heaven into the sea, verse 8. We are not told what exactly this is, who exactly threw it, and where exactly he threw it, which sea. But immediately, when that thing falls to the earth, 1/3 of the sea turns blood. Something like a big red burning with fire could be an asteroid or a nuclear weapon. It is very interesting that the greatest concern of scientists today is an asteroid colliding with the earth and falling into the sea, contaminating it. Apparently, we have located not we, they have located a big one that is coming our way that might fall on the earth or in the sea. The sea plays a very important role in the preservation of the earth. You remove the sea, we cannot exist. Something similar to this happened before. That was the first plague on Egypt in Exodus chapter 7. The Nile River turned to blood. This time it is not a river, it's a sea. We are not told which one. There are several seas in our world. Then we have in verse 9 the result of 1/3 of the sea turning to blood. Two things happen. 1/3 of the sea life will be destroyed. That is 1/3 of everything that is alive in there. All the fish, all the vegetation, everything gonna die. And then, number two, 1/3 of the ships will be destroyed. That does not mean that shipping prices will go up again. They are not that type of ships. How can 1/3 of ships be destroyed? Since ships are spread all over the world. Maybe several nations will be engaged in a battle during that time, with several battleships being gathered together in one ocean. And an asteroid falling into the sea would produce quite a tidal wave that would destroy those battleships together all at once. Then verse 10, we have the fourth part, the third trumpet. John goes on, he says, then the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. 1/3 of the waters became wormwood. And many men died from the water because it is made bitter. So as the third angel sounds his trumpet, judgment moves inland. A great star falls from heaven, wiping 1/3 of all fresh water resources. What kind of star is this? Is this a real star that we see in the sky, or is it an angel? Since angels are also referred to as stars in the Bible, it appears that the star burning like a torch here is a real star, as we see in the sky. They look small to us because they are so far away. But they are huge. They're bigger than us. In the next chapter, at the opening of the 5th trumpet, we will see another star fall from heaven. There it will be an angel, a fallen angel, not an actual star. We know it's a him because it says, to him will be given the key to the bottomless pit. But here, it is a real star who falls to the earth, and it will destroy 1/3 of the fresh water supplies, rivers, lakes, springs, all destroyed. If you remember in our study of the book of Psalm, when we got to Psalm 147, verse 4, we were told that there are billions of stars in the firmament. And we are told that God knows them all by name. And we are told the name of that one star here. It is wormwood. Wormwood was a bitter tasting plant. Solomon in Proverbs 5 used this word to define bitterness. Jeremiah 9:15 used it to mean bitter. So anyway, at the sound of the third trumpet, 1/3 of the fresh water turns bitter. The water is poison, and those drinking it die. Some people believe that a chemical warfare could contaminate the water. But we cannot speculate. Verse 12, we have the next part, the fourth trumpet. John ends this chapter and he says in verse 12, then the fourth angel sounded, and 1/3 of the sun was struck, 1/3 of the moon, and 1/3 of the stars, so that 1/3 of them were darkened. 1/3 of the day did not shine, and likewise the night. And I looked, and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the remaining blast of the trumpet of the 3 angels who are about to sound. So the first 3 trumpets had an effect on vegetation, an effect on sea life, and on the water supply. Now the 4th trumpet of the 4th angel produces terrifying disasters in the sky. Judgment now moves to the sky, turning men's attention upward. The firmament is affected, the sun, the moon, and the stars. It is interesting to note that God set up the firmament on the 4th day of creation, and he darkens it with the 4th trumpet. Look at the order. First, the earth is affected. Next, the sea. Then fresh water. And finally, the firmament. We are told here that 1/3 of the sun, 1/3 of the moon, 1/3 of the star, there are billions of them. 1/3 of them are darkened and becomes dark. How can this be? Could they all be eclipsing at the same time? Most likely, the large amount of dust and debris from a meteorite shower could very well do that. It could leave the atmosphere filled with dust. Remember when Mount St. Helens blew up, state of Washington? Billions of cubic yards of dust and debris were blown into the atmosphere. People had to turn their lights on during the day because they could not see anything. And yet the sun was up there shining. So that would be possible for the sun, the moon, and the stars to appear to shine only in part and not fully due to the dust in the atmosphere. We will see later in Revelation chapter 15, at the pouring of the 4th bowl, that the sun will be scorching men with fire. It will be strong again. This is not a contradiction of this verse. The sun might then go into what they call a supernova before it totally dies. Also, the ozone blanket might be so depleted by then that the ultraviolet rays will not be filtered out, scorching people. It will be a terrible place to be. You cannot hide. The sun is going to be so strong. You do not want to be here on earth. Now the word woe is repeated 3 times in verse 13. Woe, woe, woe. And that is for the 3 trumpets that remain. The first woe is for the 5th trumpet. The next one is for the 6th. And the third one is for the 7th trumpet, which are yet to sound. The warning is you haven't seen anything yet. There are still 3 trumpet judgments to come, and they will be worse than the first 4. It is incredible what is coming to this world. It is hard to believe that people will still curse God in the middle of all this, instead of repenting and asking for His forgiveness. As crazy as it may sound, these days of judgment are coming on a Christ-rejecting world. Jesus warned us to pray to be counted worthy to escape those things, meaning that it is indeed possible to escape those things. Otherwise, Jesus would be lying. In our previous study, chapter 7, we saw the different ways to enter heaven. You enter by dying, ending our days here and going to be with the Lord. Or you are raptured, walking with Christ, like Enoch. By the way, Enoch was a Gentile. He was not Jewish. And then living for Christ, and He takes us to heaven. Or martyred, dying a terrible death, refusing the mark of the beast. Believe it or not, the choice is ours. We will never be forced to walk with Christ. But if we do, we will enter heaven an easier way than going through the Great Tribulation. In our text this morning, we see 2 different altars in heaven. A brass altar for sacrifices, where the soul of those slain are. They come from the Great Tribulation. They are there by that brass altar. They suffered through the Great Tribulation. They made it into heaven. They're there by that altar. And we saw a golden altar for incense, which is before the throne of God. There were 2 altars in the tabernacle in the wilderness. There were 2 altars in the Jewish temple, and 2 altars in heaven. One for sacrifice, one for incense. What is interesting is that nobody can come to the altar of incense, the golden altar right before the throne of God, without first going to the altar of sacrifice. This is the order. You don't go there first. You get to go to the altar of sacrifice before you get to the altar of incense. The statement of Jesus about denying ourselves and following Him is connected to the altar of sacrifice. We must deny ourselves. We must make some sacrifices if we are to follow Him all the way to heaven. What does it mean to deny ourselves? Denying ourselves is to put ourselves on that brass altar, the altar of sacrifice, not letting our fleshly desire rule our life. It means keeping our body under, mortifying the flesh, not giving it all that it wants. And this is nothing new. This is not something that started with Jesus. When Adam and Eve were placed in the garden, they had to learn to deny themselves. The test there was one tree in the garden that they were to stay away from. Deny yourself from this. They were not to eat from that tree. They did not deny themselves. They did not want to be controlled. They wanted to do what they wanted to do. They ended up in trouble. They were kicked out of the garden. Those who choose not to put themselves on the brass altar, the altar of sacrifice, denying themselves, may have to do it later during the Great Tribulation before they make it into heaven. No one enters heaven without escaping the brass altar, the altar of sacrifice, denying ourselves. Likewise, we need to learn to deny ourselves as requested by Jesus. We can learn to do it here while it is easy to do, or we can learn to do it during the Great Tribulation. Believe me, you will know how to deny yourselves then. You will not have access to anything. You're going to be fearful of everything. Life is going to be much difficult then. But either way, we need to deny ourselves. Place your flesh on the brass altar, the altar of suffering now. Learn to deny yourselves. It is not possible to escape the brass altar, the altar for sacrifice. The only difference is when you choose to do it. It can be before the rapture or during the Great Tribulation. A life that is dominated by the flesh, by the desires of the flesh, is not acceptable to God. The Bible says clearly, if our life is ruled by the flesh, we are at odds with God. John says, if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Pretty clear. So the bottom line is self-denial. We do it either before the rapture of the church or during the Great Tribulation. Jesus clearly stated that in order to follow him to heaven, we must deny ourselves. And it is not a suggestion. Still, the choice is yours. No one will force you to deny yourself. But it is a requirement to follow Jesus. It is a requirement of heaven. You have to learn to do that. Those who choose to pamper themselves, put themselves first all the time, be good to themselves, seek self-satisfaction, pursue what is easy, looking for pleasure. They may think they are smart because they are avoiding, they are escaping the brass altar, the altar for sacrifice. Self-denial. They will not do any sacrifices. They are not that smart. They may think they are smart. They are not. They are only postponing it. It is not possible to escape it. They will have to experience it during the Great Tribulation, and it will be much worse then. We either lay our lives on the brass altar, the altar for sacrifice before the rapture, or during the Great Tribulation. Self-denial is a requirement to follow Jesus. Self-denial is a requirement of heaven. I just would like to clarify the word denial. Do not be confused into thinking that if you deny yourself the sweet desserts and hot chocolate, you're going to eat vegetables only, that is pleasing to the Lord. This is not at all what the denial is about. The denial is about denying your flesh anything that is sinful, anything that is contrary to God. Adam and Eve were told to deny themselves that one tree. That was God's direction to them. Do not eat of that tree. Well, they would not deny themselves. They did. So that's where we have to learn to deny our flesh the sinful thing, immorality and fornication, adultery, any of those sinful things. We have to deny yourself. You'd like to kill that guy next door? Deny your flesh. Do not murder. So that's what it means. And we need to learn that, to deny ourselves those sinful things before we enter heaven. That is a requirement of heaven. We have to deny this flesh, the sinful thing that exists, that this world is enjoying and will pay tremendously during the Great Tribulation. So may the Lord be with you. May the Lord bless each and every one of you. May He bless your life, your work. May the Lord touch your heart today, and may He help you. May He strengthen you to be strong enough to deny your flesh, deny yourselves of all those sinful things. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.